Mers-el-Kebir. We're in 1940 during World War II, and the French army just suffered heavy losses in the Battle of Dunkirk against the Nazis. The Germans were getting really close to Paris, and the French were starting to think about surrendering. The British, however, didn't want this to happen because the French fleet was one of the world's largest navies, and if it were to have fallen into Nazi hands, they would have certainly lost the war. For this reason, they started planning on what to do if France dropped out of the war, and the French Admiral François Darlan tried to calm waters by saying that he would have never given the fleet to the Germans. He said that if stuff really went down, he would have just destroyed it himself instead. The British War Cabinet held a meeting and decided that they would have allowed France to sign an armistice with Germany only if the fleet was moved to British ports before doing so. However, there was a problem. This would have left French North Africa without cover, rendering it vulnerable to Nazi attacks. And for this reason, the decision wasn't approved by the French Prime Minister, Paul Reynaud, who didn't want to risk that important territory. This caused a long back and forth, and eventually Reynaud resigned after multiple British rejections. The only guarantee the British had was a promise by the French that their fleet would not fall into German hands, but many thought that this wasn't enough to stay safe. Hitler himself knew that the French would have never given their fleet in the armistice to protect the British, so he put in it that the ships had to remain out of the war efforts. This wasn't that much of a reassurance for the French and British, as he wasn't the most trustworthy person. Despite these issues, on June 22, 1940, the French signed the armistice with the Nazis, momentarily putting them out of the war. Britain was in a chokehold because the situation with the French fleet was really risky, so they decided to take matters in their own hands and sink it themselves. They appointed Admiral Sir James Somerville for Operation Catapult with the goal of sinking the French fleet in Mers-el-Kebir. He arrived there, and at 5:54 p.m. on July 3, 1940, the French saw a large number of bullets and bombs coming toward them. This was the first instance of a fight between France and Britain since the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. Taken by surprise, around 1,297 French people went missing or died. 351 were wounded, and 200-plus French warships and naval auxiliaries were seized at British ports. The act was pretty sad for Admiral James Somerville himself, who halted the attack after 15 minutes and told the French that he needed to see the ships sinking, or he'd have no other choice but to reopen fire. After all of this happened, the French immediately severed relationships with Britain and bombed Gibraltar. British newspapers reported that this was a horrible but necessary move. Benedict Arnold. We're in 1775, and the Americans started the War of Independence to free themselves from British control. There was an American called Benedict Arnold, who began to be one of the most loved soldiers in the war, quickly rising up the ranks as he proved his worth in many battles, such as the capture of Fort Ticonderoga. He was so skilled that he became close friends with George Washington, and was even promoted to brigadier. It was clear to everyone that he was about to become one of the country's top generals pretty soon. However, there was a problem. Many thought he was too arrogant for such a position, while others had interests in preventing his promotion. In 1777, he found out that he was passed over for the position of Major General, and they started promoting people who had worked under him instead, making them his superiors. Benedict felt betrayed and even tried to resign, but George Washington refused to let him do so, still believing in him. As if this bitterness wasn't enough for him, he was soon afterwards injured during a battle, making him unable to return to his military life. He became military governor of Philadelphia and married Peggy Shippen, a known loyalist who sided with Britain. This caused a lot of scandal, so much that the Supreme Executive Council accused him of being an ally to the British, financial mismanagement, and abuse of power. He answered by saying that he did a lot for America and that they had been ungrateful. He was eventually found guilty, but George Washington just lightly scolded him as he remained loyal. What he didn't know was that something much shadier was happening behind the scenes. Arnold started talking with Major John Andre of the British Army. Washington, not knowing about his new alliance, asked him if he wanted to command the Army's Northern Department, but Arnold declined it, asking for the control of West Point instead, which coincidentally was of strategic importance to the British. Keep in mind that at this time, Arnold was also highly indebted and needed more financial stability, so this was the perfect opportunity for him. In June 1780, he sent the American military plans to his British friend, and even tried weakening American defenses by preventing repairs and putting troops in weird places to ensure that the position wasn't well guarded when the British arrived. Arnold was shocked when he learned that Washington himself was coming to West Point for a secret visit, and urged the British to move faster to capture him too. But on September 23, 1780, the British Major Arnold had been talking to, John Andre, was caught carrying papers that revealed their secret scheme. Washington was devastated by this betrayal, since he considered Arnold to be one of his best friends. Arnold himself managed to flee and joined the British Army that he once fought. He then went on to launch raids in Washington's home state, Virginia. Vidkun Quisling. It's 1933, and Vidkun Quisling, a Norwegian politician, just founded the National Samling, a far-right party that was basically the Norwegian equivalent of Germany's Nazi Party. He was heavily influenced by Hitler and always admired his actions, but he was never important enough to meet him, as he never gained significant support from the Norwegians. Matter of fact, he wasn't able to meet him until December 1939. Keep in mind that at this point, Norway had consistently declared its neutrality and its desire to avoid involvement in World War II. Completely disregarding the will of the Norwegian people, in the meeting with Hitler, Quisling talked about his plan to unify what he called the superior Germanic countries and shared Norwegian military secrets with Hitler, who then invaded Norway on April 9, 1940. Quisling, a Norwegian, effectively handed Norway over to Hitler, and they quickly took control of every government institution thanks to his collaboration. Quisling then, supported by Hitler, appointed a new government under his leadership, but it didn't last long. Hitler's main man in Norway, Kurt Brauer, wasn't impressed by Quisling, and the fact that the Norwegian royal family managed to escape without getting caught was proof of Quisling's incompetence. It didn't take long for the new government to fall, so Hitler decided to sort things out for himself. He removed Quisling as the head of the government and appointed Josef Terboven instead. To the disgust of the Norwegian people, Quisling continued to collaborate with the Nazis even though they removed him from his position of power. And after a while, his party and political influence started to decline until he became irrelevant. After the war, he was sentenced to death for treason, and the term Quisling has become a byword for collaborator or traitor in several languages. Ricimer and Majorian. Around 450 CE, the Western Roman Empire was on the brink of collapse. It was being constantly attacked by German barbarians, and it was hit by multiple problems, such as rampant inflation. There were two men called Ricimer and Majorian who went to war together and became really close friends, almost brothers. They fought off barbarians constantly, and they were so skilled that they quickly started climbing military ranks, becoming respected commanders. The Romans started wanting them as emperors to bring the Western Roman Empire to its previous glory. Seeing this public appreciation, the two decided to work together to kill the emperor in charge at the time, Vitus, who they thought was doing a terrible job. In 457, they succeeded in their goals, killing him and taking his throne. However, only one of the two could be the emperor, and while Ricimer was the most preferred one by the public, he technically wasn't a Roman, but a barbarian general. At the time, Rome decided to rely on some barbarian generals because it couldn't protect itself with its normal army due to its weakness. However, they maintained the rule that only true Romans could become emperors. Since Ricimer was ineligible for the throne, he just thought to let Majorian take his spot and influence him from behind the scenes. He didn't show any sign of envy, and he was truly happy when Majorian took the throne. Majorian turned out to be an incredibly good emperor, retaking large parts of previously lost territories in Italy, France, and Spain. He also made numerous changes in Rome, which led to a significant improvement in Romans' quality of life. This created a new age of hope, as the empire seemed to be healing after a period of despair. Majorian was seen as a hero and was getting all of the credit, while Ricimer was constantly overshadowed. Seeing his friend take credit for these incredible achievements, and feeling like he was the true reason for his success made him envious. Majorian was preparing a large fleet to start an operation to take back old African territories, but it suddenly went on fire. Conspiracies started circulating, saying that Ricimer was involved in this, but Majorian didn't know about it. Ricimer then went to the Senate and tried to persuade and bribe senators into thinking that Majorian wasn't fit for the emperor role, as he caused a whole fleet to go on fire. This was just the first sign of betrayal, though, as nobody could have imagined what would have happened afterwards. Majorian, with many doubts on what to do, went to Ricimer for advice, not knowing of his shady plans. As soon as they met, Ricimer killed Majorian's companions and arrested him. He then tortured him for 5 days and eventually beheaded him. After that, he tried to install more puppet emperors, but they all failed, and Rome eventually fell in 476. If you want to discuss this video or suggest an idea for the next one, join my Discord, link in the description.